But my name is, and there's three of us here at Holmes Murphy. My name is Mick McGill. I kind of work as a client advocate on the account with Rich Youngman. Don't necessarily deal with the day-to-day service of the account. Morgan does that. But I'm involved in these types of presentations, claim reviews, presentations, all the out-of-box information. And I'm going to allow Tim Regan, who's our claims person, to introduce himself. And then we have a PowerPoint that we want to go through.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tim Regan. I'm the Associate VP of Claims here at Holmes Murphy Fraternal. I'll act as kind of the liaison between you and the carrier. I work closely with MK Moshik, so we're here for your claims needs.
Hello, and I'm Morgan Ness. I'm the client service consultant with the Phi Gamma Delta account, so I handle all of the day-to-day things for the account. I issue certificates, help place workers' comp coverage, and then help with all of the property renewal information. So go ahead and get started. I have my screen shared if you can see it, but we'll try to articulate it for anyone who's on their phone and might not be able to see the screen. But what we did is we took all of the Phi Gamma Delta House Corporation claims since 2013, when we placed coverage for a good chunk of the house corporations, and we isolated what was happening within the claim. So we looked at frequency, so how often certain claims were happening, and severity, so how much money the carrier was paying out for those types of claims. So when we look at everything, water claims is the driver for Phi Gamma Delta. This is consistent with our other clients as well. We typically see water damage as being the leading cause of claim frequency and severity, aside from potentially if there's a large fire. You'll also see on the screen that in severity there is a big chunk of that to vandalism. We're seeing a few more claims in this area overall, but there is like one particular claim driving that piece on the severity. In our other category, we see things like power surge, theft, mold, collapse, and other types of claims. So that's kind of, again, just an overarching view of what's happening within the Phi Gamma Delta House Corporation claim history. So like I said, water loss is that leading cause of loss. So we wanted to kind of isolate that down and help you guys take some stuff back to your chapters to be able to implement to help prevent those losses. So again, we see this being the highest claim dollars in terms of severity, but we also see it happening most often. So some things we recommend is working with a leak protection company. Holmes Murphy partners with Piper's Pro and Leak Protect USA. And these are two companies that can install something attached to your water system. So if there is an unusual amount of water flow, it would alert you via an app or text or phone call for you to be able to engage and turn off that water. It won't stop the water on a fire sprinkler, because obviously if there was a true fire, we would want that water to run. If you install one of those, we do know it's a cost associated with installation of those products, but we do offer a discount associated with that. So the first 2 years of installation, you would receive a 20% discount off of your premium, and then 5% every year after that. That's on and running and engaged.
Can I weigh in on this?
Yeah.
This is Mick. Yeah, with regard to these two companies that we partner with, so basically what they do is they have a shutoff on the main line that comes in. So you set a threshold in terms of volume of water that you would normally see. And if you exceed that volume, it will shut the water off. And you may still have a water damage claim, but it won't be near as severe because the water is shut off. And as Morgan mentioned, it will not shut off fire sprinklers for obvious reasons. And yeah, the cost, typically is around $2,500. And so the discounts associated with installing these systems, which we highly recommend, the idea is by providing that 20% property rate reduction the first year, the second year, and 5% every year thereafter, is that over a period of time it will pay for itself. And at the end of the day, water claims, they are definitely the leading cause of loss, impacting claim frequency and severity. So if we can just minimize those types of claims, we'll be in much better shape. And at the end of the day, that's what affects rates. So
the other thing we see a lot, especially in our fraternity houses, is sprinkler going off accidentally. So we see students hanging hangers on the sprinkler heads soccer balls or footballs getting thrown down halls and knocking over the sprinkler, causing them to release water. So we would recommend either having the heads recessed, so they're not sticking out, so where a member of the chapter could hit them, or putting cages on top of the existing sprinkler head. We also see a lot of water damage happening over the extended breaks, so we highly recommend someone walking through the chapter facility every day during the winter break. We see a lot of that kind of the period of time where it's cold, so we see a lot of frozen pipes during that time period. We would recommend a house corporation member doing those walkthroughs, but it could be a student or a house director or someone near campus. We would also want to see the walkthroughs happen over the summer break, and that could probably happen 2 to 3 times a week, just to make sure nothing is going on, there's no vandalism, mold, or anything else happening within the chapter house.
I'm just going to add a comment here on the walkthroughs, particularly over the winter breaks. Every year we get 2 or 3 claims where someone driving by sees water running out the front door because no one's been in the facility and the pipes have frozen and burst. And it just seems like most of the time it's like the 3rd floor, and we have a major mess. And so we have a large claim. But if we had someone that would have walked through there, maybe we would have minimized that. For example, the furnace or the boiler quits working, we can address that before we have the pipes freeze and burst. But when you have a large claim like that, obviously there's dollars paid out, but it also disrupts the chapter, beginning the 2nd semester too, because they can't live there. So it creates all kinds of havoc. But I will just tell you that it happens 2 or 3 times each year where someone driving by sees water running out the front door. And these things could be minimized if we could just have anybody walk through the facility once a day. I mean, it'd take them just nothing more than a few minutes. Okay, the heat's not working. We got to figure this out before we have a major loss. And that's typically what occurs. So just want to point that out.
And even if the water damage, even if they get there and discover it and there's been a lot of water that's been released, it's still so important to get on it right away with a water loss like that. So if you have somebody wait even a couple of days, it can make a huge difference. So getting them out there right away, having them walk through daily in the winter is quite important. And then also make sure that whoever you have doing these inspections knows how to shut the water off too, because that can be if you don't know where the shutoff is, it can be an issue as well.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, maintenance, making sure that you're taking a facility audit so you know what's needing to be repaired and fixed. So again, staying ahead of any types of claims, making sure everything within the facility is working properly. So I'll pass it over to Mick now to talk more about kind of the insurance update and what's happening within the market.
Yeah, so let me just talk a little bit about what's going on in the property insurance market. Obviously, as house corporation folks, that's where your concern is. We are in a hard market. And in a hard market, we see rates increase. We had a rate increase last year, and we're anticipating 10 to 15% this year. It has to do with the fact that insurance carriers purchase reinsurance, the reinsurers are increasing their rates, and it's just really totality of what's going on with claim activity throughout the country, and specifically in this class of business. Now, I will tell you the good news about, I know we're in a hard market, but I will tell you that hard markets typically don't last near as long as soft markets. So we had a rate increase last year. We're anticipating 10 to 15% this year. But for a number of years prior to that, we had very minimal, if no, rate increases because we were in a soft market. So really, our obligation to you as your broker is we're going to make every effort to provide financial stability in the pricing of the program over a period of time. So we don't just renew it and take whatever the carrier says is going to happen. We really try to negotiate each time and get this done. I'll just give you an example. So here in Omaha, we have the fraternal unit who deals with the fraternal clients. We have property and casualty that deals with manufacturing, contractors, apartments, habitational risk, that sort of thing, and we have employee benefits. And I will tell you, speaking to our PNC people, they're seeing property rate increases that are exceeding 20%. So while we're going to see an increase, we feel good about the fact that it's less than what other folks here in the Omaha area are seeing and across the Midwest. So it's just, it's not a great time, but Hopefully next year things will be better, but that's where we're at. And we're also always going to be 100% transparent and open with you, which is why I'm explaining this right now. So again, hard markets typically don't last near as long as soft markets. So things will shift at a certain point. So if there's any questions or comments on that, I'm happy to take those. Okay. I want to touch on a couple other things too. So the House Corporation Board typically, essentially is serving as the landlord of that physical plan or that chapter house. We've had situations where we've had House Corporation Board members also serve as a chapter advisor, which is great, but we actually, from an insurance perspective, recommend against that, because we just believe as a House Corporation Board member, you want to be the landlord, and we want the chapter advisor to deal with the chapter activities. And why do I say that? If a claim occurs, there's no doubt, I can just tell you historically, if something happens, someone drinks too much and passes away in the chapter house, there's going to be a lawsuit filed. They're going to name the House Corporation. They're also going to name the National Fraternity. Our thought is we want our House Corporation personnel to truly serve as the landlord, because we're going to posture that litigation in a manner, or the litigation strategy is going to really evolve around going through discovery to the point that we can get the National Fraternity out of it. And that doesn't always happen, dismissing the lawsuit, but that's the goal. And when you have someone at the House Corporation level that's also serving as a chapter advisor, it just becomes increasingly difficult. And historically, if we have people in dual roles, which I respect them for doing it, but from an insurance standpoint, it becomes increasingly difficult to get the national organization out of it, or in some situations, the House Corporation should be dismissed. It could just be a chapter activity off premises, but because this chapter advisor also serves on the House Corporation, they name the House Corporation. In that instance, the litigation strategy would be to, okay, the House Corporation serves as the landlord. We want to posture the litigation in a manner that we want them dismissed, and then we just deal with the chapter. But when you're serving in dual roles, it becomes increasingly difficult. And if you look at our claim statistics, it just exponentially increases the cost of these claims. So that's a recommendation we have. And again, these are recommendations. We don't ever dictate what you do. We just make recommendations. The next thing is employee versus independent contractors. We have situations where, if you have an employee, obviously we hope that you have workers' compensation coverage in place, because if they have workers' compensation in place and it truly is an employee and they're injured, there's something called, they cannot pursue a claim against the employer. Their sole remedy, there's something called the exclusive remedy rule under workers' compensation, which says, as an employee, if you're injured during the scope and course of your work, your sole remedy is the workers' compensation policy. You cannot pursue a claim against the employer, which is the House Corporation, the vast majority of the time. So it alleviates the issue of having a potential GL claim. When you hire independent contractors, and there's nothing wrong with hiring them, just understand that they are not employees. And sometimes we have situations where we hire an independent contractor and there's a claim that occurs, and our House Corporations want that covered under workers' compensation. And when that occurs, the insurance carrier goes through and says, okay, did you control their hours? Did you provide the tools? All these things. And if they're truly an independent contractor, they're not going to have coverage under workers' compensation. And if for some reason they're injured as a result of the negligence of the House Corporation, let's just say, where two floor coverings came together, there was a bit of an unevenness and someone tripped and fell, they could pursue a liability claim against you. So there truly is a difference between an employee and independent contractor. So if you're going to hire an independent contractor, understand the independent contractor needs to have their own insurance. An employee, hopefully if you have employees, you're covering them under workers' compensation. The last thing would be anytime you use an independent contractor, we really recommend that you confirm that they are fully insured from a liability standpoint. So they carry commercial general liability insurance with minimum limits of $1 million per occurrence, $2 million aggregate. They carry workers' compensation insurance, and that they include the house corporation as an additional insured on their policy before they begin to do work for the house corporation. And I'll give you an example where we had a sorority out in California where they used a painting contractor, and the painting contractor had no insurance, and the employee fell 30 feet off a ladder. And so the employee went to pursue a claim against his employer, only to find out there was no workers' compensation coverage. And in the state of California, you can then go after the project owner, which was the house corporation, and they ended up paying over $130,000 for this individual's injuries. And if they had done the right things in terms of making sure they carried their own insurance, they were insured, they would not have done that. And when you pay $130,000 under workers' compensation, your premiums are going to go up. So just using fully insured contractors, even if they cost a little bit more than somebody who's not, I think you're still going to be dollars ahead in the end. So.
I have a quick question just based on what you just said there. It's ironic we're actually going through this. So anybody that comes in and does work on your house, and by the way, we always request that they have complete coverage, but I just want to make sure I understand. You are recommending that they have $1 million on general liability, and then what was that, 2 million? You said 2 million.
2 million aggregate.
Aggregate.
Well,
okay.
We can keep it simple. $1 million per occurrence, because that's all that you would be concerned about.
And just to be clear, even if they have insurance, you are suggesting that they should name us as the insured and endorse the COI over to us, correct?
Yeah, they should include the house corporation as an additional insured, which they can do. Their insurance agent can produce that, and then they can send it to you. So you'd be an additional insured on the policy, which further protects you. It's not bad.
No, I was curious about different sideline. I'm in banking, so I deal with insurance all the time. But as a house corp member, we've always requested that we see that they're insured. And I just took over as house corporation president. But the former house corporation president never requested that anybody get the COI endorsed over to us and us named. So, okay, thanks.
I believe they should if they're performing work for you that you're paying them for. Yeah. I think it's a very reasonable request.
Yeah, it takes literally 5 minutes. Once you get their agent on the phone, they can do it and send it over in 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yep. So the last thing we wanted to talk about was job descriptions. We see a lot of this claims come up as far as workers' compensation claims. So as far as job descriptions, we recommend you fill out all duties that the house director, is typically the employee we see, would perform. We would make sure you would want to include all physical requirements of that job description so that they know what they're signing up for or what job they're applying for. And then during that application process, confirming that they can perform all those duties outlined within the job description. And then we would highly recommend that they stay only within the scope of that job description. So we've seen house directors climb up on ladders, changing light bulbs, and fall and get injured when maybe changing that light bulb wasn't within their scope and duty, and maybe someone else would perform that job. So do you have anything else to add on job description?
Well, with regard to physical requirements, so here's what we see a lot from a work comp standpoint, is you'll have a chef or a cook, and many times they're older ladies or men, and they may have a pre-existing issue, which you don't necessarily know about, but at the end of the day, they need to understand that they got to be able to lift, 5 to 10 pounds frequently, up to 20 pounds, twist, bend, all that. Because if you have a pre-existing condition that's aggravated during the course and scope of their work, it's going to be compensable or covered under work comp. And we just see so many situations where an employee can't physically do it because, again, to be honest with you, a lot of the cooks are older ladies, and they work 1 week and they hurt their back, and they've had back issues, and okay, now we're on the hook for $100,000 surgery. And that's difficult to navigate. I understand that, but I think if you include the physical requirements of the position in the job description, and then really emphasize these are the only things we want you to do. We don't want the house director up on a ladder, because we've had that happen many times. And God bless them, they're trying to help out, but then they fall, they're hurt, and we end up with a major work comp claim. So these are just things to kind of minimize the probability that an employee's injured or a worker's injured.
Well, that is all we have for you today. We did send over a packet of resources provided by our education team that should be distributed to you at some point this weekend. I guess we can open it up. We have 5 minutes left, so we can answer any questions. I will pop my email in the chat so you have that. If you have follow-up questions or concerns, I'd be happy to answer those.
So does anyone have any questions or comments or concerns that we should be discussing at this point?
Before questions get started, just want to remind everyone the next session will start at 1:35, and then during the vendor hall, we'll have some time to ask questions as well. So if your questions don't get answered right now, you'll have another opportunity to do so.
Hi, I have a question about, you briefly talked about the sprinklers. And my chapter right now, we're looking at building a new house, so we're going through the design process and trying to figure out the extent of the sprinklers they're needed. Do you see that? Like, does that still outweigh the fire issues? How often are we're concerned with the, like you mentioned, the sprinklers going off and damaging the house, and that being a bigger issue than the potential fire. Do you have any feedback on that? Like how we should approach that? Is there water always in the sprinkler system, or does it get put through when it goes off?
Yeah, so, well, let me start by saying we absolutely recommend sprinklers. In fact, I think if you look at it nationally, I don't believe there's ever been a fatality at a collegiate institution in a facility that's been fully sprinkled. What we see though, and if you're putting in sprinklers, we really recommend putting the cages around the sprinkler head, because we see so many claims where kids are messing around, as Morgan mentioned, kicking soccer balls or footballs, and they hit the head, and we end up with a water loss. We did have 2 fires this past year. One started in the attic, which wasn't sprinkled, which is not required to get the discount. So we get that. And one started out, it was an arson fire that started on the porch and burned its way outside. So there were significant losses where the sprinklers didn't have the normal impact they would, but we absolutely recommend those. And I would just say we really, really believe that having cages over those heads makes a lot of sense. And it's very cheap to do. So
yeah, those cages aren't very expensive, and they're in a situation like this at a fraternity where there's kids playing ball and that type of thing in the hallways. It's really cost effective.
The last thing would be, Brett, is that the sprinkler rates are much cheaper than non-sprinkle rates in terms of the property insurance costs.
Okay. Do you see many like so if we have them caged or recessed, there's very low risk of them going off accidentally? Or what if somebody holds up their lighter? How does that process, like, could they set them off and all of a sudden we have a room filled with water and we're have a mess to deal with? Or
yeah, the cages are only going to help in situations where an object hits the sprinkler head. So if someone, I mean, I don't know, I got to be honest with you, I don't know if you put a lighter up there, if it would, depend on the amount of smoke, if it would go off or not. It certainly could, but the cage will not help in that particular instance. The cage is specifically for physical objects that collide with the head that cause the issue. So, but
Brett,
we definitely recommend them for sure.
okay.
Brett,
So
are you building your house on your campus or is it off campus?
It is off campus.
And are you subject to the university's requirements as far as some local housing outlines by the university?
No, we're dealing with the city's code requirements. So we can potentially not have sprinklers, but then we have to do a whole bunch of other fireproofing with the building, which would probably be more cost effective, or would be more costly to fire rate the building. The other part is right now we're looking at moving a house, a historical house, and then adding on to it. So there's a whole bunch of different code things we're going through with the city, and so we're just trying to weigh out there's the initial cost, but then obviously the insurance costs and all these other stuff that goes with it. So I was kind of curious if people had experience of like I think it's kind of whether it's a myth of, you see all these TV shows, the sprinklers go off and then the room is filled with water, and whether how often that actually, what's the reality of that, right? If you guys had experience of like, is that a valid concern, or is that minimal risk that we?
Listen, we don't want water damage claims, but at the end of the day, I think if you can sprinkle it, you absolutely should.
Okay.
We don't want fatalities. I mean, that's the most important part, right? Forget the insurance cost. And if you can put cages around the heads, I think it just helps alleviate or minimize the probability of a water damage claim. Won't eliminate it completely, but will certainly help, because we do see a ton of them with soccer balls and footballs hitting these heads, when kids are messing around, which is, that's going to continue probably.
Nobody's ever going to come. Nobody's ever going to come and tell you to remove a sprinkler system. If anything, they're going to tell you to add one later. So if you do it now, I would assume it'd be cheaper to do at this point.
Yeah.
I agree with Mark. I agree with you, Mark. Yeah, definitely. And at some point they will be required if they're not now, I believe, at some point in the future.
Required by
code.
Okay.
I mean, maybe not today, because I heard what you said, but
yeah. Well, and also like we're actually in Canada too, so I don't know, the code requirements might be different. I don't know. There's all that as well, right?
Okay.
So there's a whole nother level there.
Okay.
But I appreciate the feedback. The biggest thing is probably have similar issues, right, across North America. So I was wanting to see what the kind of claims are, and appreciate the feedback.
Yeah.
If you have a student you're worried about messing with the fire sprinklers, it's going to be the same student that if you don't have fire sprinklers, they're going to pull the fire alarm anyhow. So I think either way. So.
Oh, that's true. Good point. Any other questions? Well, if not, thank you for taking the time. We really appreciate the opportunity to visit with you. So, and then I think as Noah mentioned, there's a session at the end for questions if additional things come up. So,
I think we're officially rolling into our next session.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, fine.
Take care, guys. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Stop, reset, repeat.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. You're on here. My name is Mick McGill, and I work as a client advocate for Phi Gamma Delta along with Rich Youngman. I deal with these types of things, the renewal discussions, the midterm reports, contract review, that sort of thing. But very much involved in the account. I'm with Tim Regan here today, and also Morgan Metz. And basically, this presentation, we're going to talk about some claim statistics specific to the organization, some recommendations we have to reduce risk, and then a little bit about what we're seeing in the insurance market. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Regan.
Hi there, I'm Tim Regan. I'm the Associate VP of Claims at Holmes Murphy Fraternal. I have 32 years claims experience, and I'll be acting as a liaison between you and the carrier. I work closely with MK Moshik, and we're here for your claim needs.
And I'm Morgan Metz. I'm the client service consultant that works with Phi Gamma Delta. I've been with Holmes Murphy for almost 5 years now, and I handle the day-to-day things for the house corporations, whether it's property insurance, workers' compensation, or getting those certificates issued. So what we did was we took all of the claims from Phi Gamma Delta starting in 2013 and isolated what was happening as far as claim activity, as far as frequency and severity, so how often they were happening and how severe, so how many claim dollars were being spent on those types of claims. And what we see, which is pretty consistent across all of our clients, is water damage being the leading cause of loss in both frequency and severity. So we see that as the primary driver of the insurance claim dollars and how many times claims are getting reported. So we want to provide you some water loss prevention strategies so that you can take this back to the chapter facility to prevent those water claims. So the big one we would recommend is installing a leak protection system. We work closely with a partnership with Pipe Burst Pro. and Leak Protection USA. And I actually did pull the statistics. I forgot to share this with the last group. But when we looked at the water losses, the total water losses was a little over $600,000. And with the leak protection savings, so those claims that would have been impacted if a leak protection system would have been implemented, the savings could have been close to $250,000. So it does have a significant impact within the clients that utilize those. So the leak protection system would set up to use the water lines if there was an unusual amount of water flow in the facility. It would alert you via phone call, a notification through the app, or a text message, which would help you be able to go and shut off the water and get some support at the facility. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, it'll actually shut off the water. So if you meet or exceed whatever threshold you set, it will shut off the water. So if you have a pipe that freezes and bursts, instead of having a $200,000 loss, it might be $20,000 because it's going to shut off the water. Now, it will not shut off fire sprinkler systems for obvious reasons. We want those to remain in place. So.
Yep. If you do install one of these, we do offer a discount, which would help it does cost money to install these, so hopefully pay for itself in the end. But the first 2 years would be a 20% discount, and then 50% discount off that premium every year after. So it is a good investment for the house corporation. And
the idea behind the discounts, it's typically around $2,500 to put these in. I mean, it can vary depending on your specific chapter house, but the idea behind this and the agreement we have with the carriers is, they fully support that if we can pay for that investment over a period of time, which is typically 4 or 5 years, the discounts will pay for that. Because water damage is the leading cause of loss impacting claim frequency and severity for all of our losses unless a client had a major fire loss. So if we can just minimize those types of claims, it just helps us stabilize rates. It helps you guys stabilize rates, and we, hopefully we won't see premium increases and maybe in a good market, premium reductions.
The other thing we see is sprinklers going off incidentally. We see chapter members throw footballs or kick soccer balls down the hall and hit those sprinkler heads. So we would recommend installing cages over those sprinkler heads or putting in recessed heads so that they're not sticking out where they could be hit by some students playing in the hallways. The other option or other thing we see is people hanging hangers on those or just messing with them when they shouldn't be. So that would be a good opportunity to prevent those sprinkler losses. That would not be one we would want to see. The other thing we see is frozen pipes that happen over the extended break. So we would also recommend that someone walks through the chapter facility every day during the winter break, especially in those colder locations, and then 2 to 3 times a week over the summer break, just to make sure there's nothing going bad at the house, making sure the boiler, the heat's on, everything's good with that. Tim or Mick, do you want to add anything on walkthroughs?
It's important that water loss be caught quickly, so that the daily walkthroughs in the winter is a great idea, because just a day or two can make a huge difference with water as far as the onset of mold, mildew, the categories of the dangers of the water increase every day, so it's important that.
And I think you mentioned before, Timmy, and make sure whoever's doing the walkthrough knows how to shut the water off.
Absolutely, because it's something you wouldn't think about, but when the time comes and you don't know, especially in a big house, you don't know where that water shut off is, it could be a major issue. So that's something ahead of time to make sure they know that.
Okay. And finally, as far as prevention, we would want to focus on maintenance of the facility. We know a lot of these are older buildings, so making sure you're taking a facility audit annually to make sure that you know what's going on in the house so you can save funds to make those necessary repairs to make sure everything's working properly.
Yeah, so this is Mick again. I just want to touch a little bit, specifically on the property insurance market, what's going on. Insurance market conditions in the property area, I would characterize it as being a hard market versus a soft market. We had a number of years where we did not have any rate increases. Last year we did have one, and this year we're looking at a property rate increase ranging from 10 to 15%, depending on the facility, location of it, and whether it's sprinkled or not. The good news is hard markets don't last as long as short markets. It really has to do with what's going, I mean, these insurance carriers purchase reinsurance from reinsurance carriers, and their cost is going up. And you see that when you see the number of hurricanes, tornadoes, hail, wind, all that kind of stuff. And then we have to talk specifically about our class of business, which is fraternal organizations, and the losses we're seeing there, which is why we're emphasizing really trying to do what we can do to reduce the probability that water losses occur. Because if we could reduce those, it would help the entire program and each of our insurers in terms of premiums. But we are going to see that increase. I will also tell you this, you know, here in Omaha, we have a fraternal unit. We have a regular property and casualty unit that sells property insurance to manufacturers, contractors, apartment complexes, that sort of thing, and they're seeing increases in excess of 20%. So I never want to act like an increase is good, because it's not. But the fact is 10 to 15% is a lot better than what I'm hearing that they're dealing with on a habitational standpoint, which is really the class of business fraternal chapter houses fall within. So. This is me again. The next thing I want to talk about is, so as a house corporation, you know, 501c7, I mean, I think the goal is to really act as a landlord for that facility. And then you have a chapter advisor. We have run into situations where somebody on the house corporation board also serves as the chapter advisor, which I give that person a ton of credit for doing that. We really believe from an insurance perspective, it's important to separate that. So if you're on the house corporation board, you do not serve as a chapter advisor. And here's why. I'll just give you a claim scenario. You have a hazing incident that occurs, or a party within the chapter house where there's no premise liability issues, but somebody drinks too much and has to be hospitalized or passes away. The lawsuit's going to include the house corporation, and it's going to include the chapter. The litigation strategy when these things occur is to litigate it through discovery to a point where we can get the house corporation removed or dismissed as the defendant to the lawsuit. And that can be done through a motion for summary judgment or a motion to dismiss. However, if you have a situation where somebody on the house corporation board also serves as the chapter advisor, so they're kind of more involved in the chapter activities, the probability of getting the house corporation dismissed is significantly reduced. So for that purpose, from an insurance perspective, we believe separating that makes sense. The next thing is when you need work done, are you going to use, well, let's just start with, do you hire employees or independent contractors? So we have some clients who don't want to pay for workers' compensation, so they hire an independent contractor, which is fine, but they're really treated as an employee, meaning their hours are controlled, payroll taxes are withdrawn, they get so many times for breaks, lunches, that sort of thing. And then that independent contractor is injured, and then they want to pursue a workers' compensation claim. Well, the house corporation didn't buy workers' compensation because they thought they were hiring an independent contractor. So when that claim comes through, now you have an exposure to have a liability claim. So if that employee really wants to pursue the matter, it will be a general liability claim. So we really believe if you really want someone to be an employee, that you purchase workers' compensation insurance. It's not that expensive. Workers' compensation insurance includes something called the exclusive remedy rule, which means as a worker or an employee, if you're injured as a result of the negligence of the employer, so some sort of premise defect, your exclusive remedy is the benefits that are paid under the workers' compensation policy, and they cannot pursue the matter against the employer. They could against a third party, but not the employer. So by purchasing workers' compensation insurance and using employees, you're going to totally alleviate the issue of having a liability claim, and that's where the big money's spent. If we have liability claims that are paid, the premiums go up. The last thing I would mention with regard to contractors, if you're going to have a contractor complete work on the house, make sure they're fully insured. We recommend they carry general liability insurance with $1 million of liability insurance, a minimum insurance limit of $1 million, and that they include the house corporation as an additional insured, and that they also carry workers' compensation insurance, and that they send you a certificate of insurance that documents that and documents that they've included the house corporation as additional insured. That puts you in the best possible position should an incident occur. And I mentioned this in the last session, we had a sorority who hired a painting company to paint the house, and one of the employees fell off a ladder approximately 30 feet, was injured, obviously, pursued a workers' compensation claim against the employer. He had no workers' compensation, and with workers' compensation and state laws, he was in a position to then pursue a workers' compensation claim against the project owner, which was the house corporation and sorority, and they ended up paying out of $130,000 on that claim, which could have been completely removed if they would have used a fully insured contractor, even if they're going to charge a little bit more than somebody who is not insured. So for those reasons, we believe it's really important to take those steps when you use contractors.
Yeah. And then finally, if you do have employees, we would recommend having really outline job descriptions for those. We would want you to fill out all the duties that they would need to perform and make sure that they understand the physical requirements of that job description. So if it's a chef, that they're probably going to be lifting something regularly, same with like a housekeeper. You'd want to confirm that all of the employees could perform those job duties as outlined in the job description ahead of any hiring of them. And then making sure that they stay strictly within that job description so they're not doing anything outside the scope and duty of their role as an employee of the house corporation. We've seen like house directors on ladders changing light bulbs, falling and getting injured when that was maybe outside the scope of their role for the house corporation. Anything else to add? Okay.
Very good.
So that's all we have for you. We did provide our education team put together a packet of resources that will be distributed to you at some point during the conference. And again, if you have any questions or concerns related to your insurance, we stand by to answer those questions.